Some legends are whispered only in shadows. This is the story of Aryan, a demigod born not of Olympus but of fire and mortal steel. The gods feared him and tried to erase his very existence. Tonight we uncover the dark secret they wanted to hide. Welcome to Whisper from History. Prepare to journey beyond the myths you thought you knew. They say the gods forget, that Olympus high and cold turns its face only to the mighty and the loud, to the heroes whose names echo through marble halls and stained scrolls. But some names were never meant to be remembered. Some stories burn too hot, too wild, too dangerous for the world to carry. This is one of them. You have not heard of Aryan, son of Callista, but you will, and once you do, you may wish you hadn't. Beneath the smoke-veiled skies of Myene, where the sea clawed against black cliffs, and men lit their homes with coal fires and superstition, there lived a woman who defied the fabric of her world. Callista, blacksmith, war-maker, mother. Not born of wealth or nobility, but of grit and fire. Her forge, perched at the edge of the village like a temple of flame, rang out at all hours. The anvil was her altar, and she prayed with every strike of her hammer. Have you ever heard metal sing? Not clatter, not clang, but sing, like a bird of prey at dusk, low and hungry. That was Callista's touch. It was said she once forged a blade so fine it parted air like silk, another that never dulled, no matter how many necks it severed. Soldiers came with coin, kings sent emissaries. But she asked no names, accepted no titles. She worked for those who burned like she did. And then, one night, something changed. The winds died. The fire, though fed, dimmed. And from the shadows he came. Histus, god of the forge, patron of crippled fire, the broken Olympian who limped through myths like an afterthought. But Callista saw the truth behind the stories. He wasn't weak, he wasn't forgotten. He was watching, always watching. Not the dancers of Dionysus or the warriors of Ares. No. He watched her, the mortal with soot on her cheeks and calluses on her soul. He did not speak that first night. He didn't need to. The forge answered for him, and in the glow of molten bronze, amidst iron sparks and mortal silence, a pact was made, not in words, not even in flesh, but in fire. 9 months later, the forge flared without flame. Callista cried out beneath the same anvil, where she had once shaped her finest blade, as a child came into the world with no scream, only a slow, deep breath, as though waking, not being born. His eyes were embers. The air around him shimmered with heat. They named him Aryan, and the village recoiled. Even as a babe, Aryan bore the silence of an ancient thing. He did not babble, he did not cry when cold. His touch warmed the skin. Animals avoided him. The smithy fire never needed stoking when he was near. And the whispers began. "Not right," muttered the elder women, fingers twitching around worry beads. "Demon son," spat the priests, though none dared enter Callista's workshop. But Callista, she loved him with a mother's wrath. She taught him how to speak to fire, how to hear its breath in the coals, how to listen. "You do not own flame," she said once, her hand resting on his shoulder, skin blistering slightly beneath the contact. "It owns you, unless you make it your ally." Aryan listened. At 5, he shaped his first nail. By 7, a dagger. It cut through steel like flesh. He never missed a strike, never showed exhaustion. Yet he never smiled either. He watched the world through the eyes of something waiting. At 16, he looked 20. His forge bled heat into the village air. The skies above his home always red-tinted. He forged for warlords, for temples, for ghost riders of the eastern dunes. Yet he never asked for coin, never traveled beyond the mountains. But at night he dreamt of fire, of a mountain in the clouds, where a flame eternal burned in a bowl forged by no hand, mortal or divine, and a voice soft and low like coal cracking under weight, whispering, "It is dying." No one else heard it. But Aryan did. The hearths of men were growing cold, not their fires, their spirit. The world was turning gray, gods retreating, myths unraveling. And Aryan, born of 2 forges, one mortal, one divine, was not meant to watch it fade. He was meant to rekindle it, but the way was not clear. For the eternal flame, once gifted to mortals by Prometheus, now buried atop Olympus again, was not unguarded, not forgotten. The gods knew its power, and they would not give it up easily a second time. And in the shadows, as Aryan's dreams grew hotter, something else stirred. Cerberon, the three-headed beast that never slept, chained not in the underworld, but beneath the flame itself. A sentinel of fire and judgment, its eyes saw past lies, its hunger knew no end. Then Hermes, the trickster, the jealous, the winged coward. He watched Aryan with a smirk carved in gold, already planning 1,000 ways to undo him, each crueler than the last. A god with too much time and far too many secrets. And the oracle? Ah, the one they called Nyssa of the Storms. She had been blind for 50 years, her eyes taken by Zeus himself, for seeing too far. But still, in visions soaked with blood and thunder, she saw Aryan, always Aryan, walking the path of Prometheus, and dying, every time, Aryan, dying. And so the whispers grew, a flame reborn, a godling risen from ash and iron, a quest not for glory, but salvation. But what is salvation without sacrifice? What would you give to set the world ablaze? The night Aryan left Myene, the sea turned black. Callista did not cry. She watched from the forge, her face blank, her palms raw. No goodbye, no blessing. Only a single nod, and a hammer placed into her son's hand, the same one she'd forged the day he was born. Engraved in a language no longer spoken, he walked alone, barefoot. His cloak was rough wool, his blade, his own. And above him, Olympus stirred. They had ignored him once. They would not do so again. The journey had begun. And already, something ancient was waking. The path to Olympus is not carved on any map. No road dares claim it. No stars guide the way. Aryan walked where no man should, along the forgotten veins of the earth fissures, where the old world still breathed beneath stone, where roots whispered in dead tongues and the air tasted of iron and ash. He did not look back. Myene was smoke behind him, a flickering ember in the vast shadow he now pursued. You ever feel it? That silence just before a storm when the world holds its breath? That's what followed him. Birds did not sing. Wolves kept their distance. Even the winds seemed to watch, curious, cautious. It wasn't fear that gripped the earth as Aryan passed. It was recognition. They remembered. He crossed into the Vale of Echoes after 7 days of walking. They said it was once a kingdom, ruled by a tyrant who tried to bind time itself. Now it was only ruins and shadows, voices trapped in the crumbling stones, the voices of those who had begged the gods and been denied. Their cries still lived in the wind, repeating endlessly. But Aryan was not moved by ghosts. He found shelter beneath an archway swallowed by ivy and dusk. He did not sleep. He simply closed his eyes and listened. And in that stillness, a whisper not born of the wind found him. You do not belong in the realm of mortals, boy. Aryan did not flinch. Nor do I yet belong to Olympus. The voice grew sharper, amused. Yet you walk to it. He stood slowly. I walked to its fire. From the shadows, a figure emerged. She wore nothing but a cloak of feathers, her body lean as a blade, her eyes rimmed in lightning. Nyssa, the oracle, the cursed. Do you even know what you seek? She asked, stepping into the moonlight. Her blind eyes did not waver, though they saw nothing. You dream of the eternal flame. But it is not what you believe. It is not light. It is hunger. Aryan's jaw tightened. Then I will feed it. She tilted her head. With what? He did not answer. Because he knew. And so did she. Everything. She whispered. You will give everything. The earth trembled. Not a quake, a warning. Something old was stirring beneath their feet. She stepped closer, close enough that her voice was no longer prophecy, but breath. You were forged, not born. Hystus shaped you in fire, not to survive, but to burn. Even the gods fear what cannot be extinguished. Aryan stared into her empty eyes. Let them. But Nyssa did not laugh. Instead, she reached into the folds of her cloak and withdrew something wrapped in shadow, a shard of obsidian, carved with the mark of Prometheus. She placed it in his palm. It pulsed, faintly warm. "Follow the shard," she said. "It remembers the fire." And then she turned. Her body dissolved into a storm of crows that vanished into the clouds. Alone again, Aryan clenched the shard. It hummed against his skin, drawing his path not north, but downward toward the cradle of ash, where flame once kissed the world's heart, toward the underlands. But the gods were not idle. High above, Olympus trembled. Hermes lounged in a throne of silver wind, one eye lazily watching the boy's journey. "He moves," he said to no one in particular. "So much effort for a spark." Ares scoffed. "He won't reach the gates." Hera, cold and watchful, turned her gaze toward the sea. "The question is not if he'll reach them, but what follows if he does." And Zeus said nothing. He stared into the clouds where lightning curled around his fingertips, and remembered the day Prometheus bled for fire. He remembered the screams, and for the first time in eons, the father of gods felt something ancient stir in his gut. Doubt. Aryan descended into the underlands on the 13th night. The path was no path at all, a jagged crack in the world's skin veiled in sulfur and blackness. He entered without torch or guide. He was the flame, and the earth recognized its own. The air thickened. The walls grew hot. Whispers clawed at the edges of his mind, voices of those who had died in fire, gods struck down, mortals who had tried and failed. They did not speak words, they screamed. And Aryan walked through them. He reached the threshold, a massive cavern where the air shimmered red and stone dripped like wax. At the center stood a gate not built but grown, bone and obsidian twisted together, alive and breathing. Behind it, the cradle. But before the gate, waiting, was the guardian. "Cerberon, you've heard of Cerberus, 3 heads, a dog of death. Forget it. Cerberon was no beast, it was a force. It rose from the molten ground like a mountain wrapped in sinew and shadow, its 3 heads neither wolf nor hound, but skeletal masks of judgment. One for the past, one for the future, and one that saw only the now. Its body shifted, ever burning, its breath a cloud of rot and heat. It did not growl. It remembered. And Aryan stepped forward. The shard in his hand flared. Cerberon's eyes, all 6 of them, turned, and the world held still. "Blood of fire," the guardian rumbled, its voice 1,000 dying stars. "You seek the cradle?" Aryan nodded. Cerberon moved, slower than death, its steps melting stone. "You are not yet worthy." Aryan drew no blade. He simply said, "Then test me." The guardian struck. What followed was not battle. It was trial. Cerberon did not aim to kill. It aimed to break. Each blow conjured images from Aryan's mind. Callista, burned alive. The world in chains. The forge frozen, and worst, a mirror, showing Aryan atop Olympus, flame in his hand, and nothing in his heart. But he stood. He did not falter, not once. And in the silence after the 3rd head lunged and failed, the gate behind Cerberon creaked open. The guardian growled, not in defeat, but in warning. "You burn brighter than he did." Aryan narrowed his eyes. "Prometheus?" Cerberon's heads turned one by one away. "No, brighter than Zeus." And the gate opened. Aryan stepped into the cradle, and the fire woke up. The cradle of ash did not welcome visitors. It devoured them. Aryan stepped through the bone gate and into a realm that pulsed with something older than gods, something raw and eternal. The cavern was alive, not in metaphor, but in breath and blood. Its walls heaved with molten veins. Its ceiling flickered with stars that never reached the sky. And at its center, rising like a wound in the world, burned the flame. Not a fire, a force. It stood taller than any man, unbound by torch or timber, a living column of white and gold, coiling, twisting, whispering. Its light was not warmth. It was memory, and pain, and power. Aryan stepped forward. The shard in his palm vibrated violently, then cracked. The memory of Prometheus pulsed once and vanished into the flame, consumed without hesitation. The flame turned to face him. Not literally, it had no eyes, but Aryan felt it regard him, felt it reach into his mind, every secret, every scar, every silent scream. The flame took it all without asking, without permission. Do you know what it feels like to have your soul laid bare? To stand in front of something that sees your every failure and still judges you too weak? Aryan swayed. Images surged in his skull. Callista's face as she struck her final sword. The villagers calling him cursed, the gods laughing above, his own hands, covered in blood not yet spilled. The flame was not offering itself. It was waiting for him to take it. But that was the price. Only those willing to be unmade could carry it. Aryan dropped to his knees, not in submission, but to dig his fingers into the stone, to anchor himself. He screamed, not aloud. The kind of scream that tears through the marrow. The kind that splits the line between man and God. And the flame blinked, just once. It pulsed outward, wrapping around him. It did not consume him. Not yet. It tested, each coil of heat pulling away something mortal, something soft. His regrets, his hopes, even his name. And still he held on. He did not pray, he did not beg, he endured. And in that, the flame found what it had long forgotten in men, will. It surged into him, not over time, not gradually. In a single searing breath, the flame entered his chest, splitting his ribs, rewriting his bones, etching ancient sigils into the walls of his soul. His eyes glowed, no longer coal, but white-hot stars. His veins lit like rivers of magma. His heart, once shaped by love, now pulsed with divine fire. Aryan did not cry out. He stood, changed, alive, and yet doomed, because above Olympus had felt it. The throne shuddered, the clouds split. Zeus rose. Lightning licked his beard, his knuckles cracked with thunder. He touched the flame. Hera whispered, her voice tight with something not quite fear, but close. Hermes vanished without a word. Ares grinned. And Zeus, for the first time since Prometheus's theft, stepped down from Olympus. Aryan emerged from the underlands not as a boy, nor even a man. He was something else now. The trees bent as he passed. Birds followed in silence. The river steam hissed where he walked. He moved with no map. He was the map now, the flame guiding his path with memory instead of direction. But his steps did not lead him home. They led him to the ruins of Delphi. Once a city of oracles, now shattered and twisted, glassed by divine wrath centuries ago. The place where fate once lived, and where one last prophecy still lingered. Nyssa waited, older now, thinner, as if time had drained her like wine from a cracked chalice. She heard him before he arrived. "You carry it," she said without turning. Aryan said nothing. "You think that makes you savior?" Still nothing. She turned. Her blind eyes wept. "I saw your ending. I saw it the moment you were born. You take the flame, and the gods fall, but so does the world." Aryan stepped into the temple, what remained of it. The flame inside him pulsed softly, not with rage, but with purpose. Nyssa touched his chest. Her fingers trembled. "You burn too brightly." He looked down at her. "Then let the shadows fear me." She smiled, sad, proud, terrified. "Zeus comes." "I know. You'll lose everything." "I already have." And from the cracked marble beneath their feet, the last of Delphi's magic stirred. The air darkened. The wind fell silent, and in the distance thunder walked on two legs. The first strike came not from the sky, but from the sea. A tidal wave taller than mountains, conjured by Poseidon, roared toward the coast of Thessalia. It swallowed villages, drowned the innocent. Not as punishment, as warning. Olympus had no intention of letting a demigod rise unchecked. They were cleaning the board. Aryan watched from a cliff above. He could see the storm approach, black and wide and ruthless. He could hear the screams. He did not hesitate. He stepped to the edge and raised his hand. And the sea burned. The wave evaporated in midair, steam curling upward like the breath of titans. The fire within him had learned the language of water and silenced it. The people watched in awe. They fell to their knees. They whispered a new name, Fireborn. But Aryan did not hear them, because in the cloud above, high and hidden, lightning coiled. Zeus had arrived, and the sky itself prepared to split in half. The war had begun. The clouds did not roll. They tore. From the heavens a chasm of storm opened like a scream, jagged and endless, and from its heart descended a shadow wrapped in lightning. Not a god in shining robes, not a noble figure of celestial wisdom. No, Zeus was fury made flesh, his armor cracked like obsidian struck by thunder, his beard curled with static, his eyes twin cyclones that saw nothing but rebellion. His hands, they gripped bolts so large they bent space around them. He said nothing. Words were beneath him now. He looked down upon Aryan, this boy, this fire-wrapped bastard son of an outcast god, and saw not a threat but an insult. The flame was sacred, stolen once, yes, by Prometheus, but kept from mortals for a reason. Zeus knew what men became when fire burned too bright in their blood. He'd seen empires rise, then rot from within. He'd scorched the earth to cleanse it before. He would do so again. Aryan did not flinch beneath the god's gaze. The fire in his chest flared, not in defense, but in response. It knew Zeus. It remembered him, the old tyrant who'd caged it for eons. And now, unshackled, it answered, not with flame, but with silence. A silence so deep even thunder paused. And then without ceremony the sky fell. The first bolt struck faster than thought. Aryan raised his arm. It did not stop the lightning. It devoured it. The bolt hit, cracked, splintered, then vanished into his palm like water down a drain. The ground around him boiled. Stones glowed red. Trees ignited just from being near him. Zeus snarled. Another bolt. Then another. 7 strikes, each meant to kill gods, each absorbed. And then Aryan moved. Not like a man, like a weapon. He hurled forward, every step cracking the earth, fire trailing behind him like a comet's tail. He leapt, fist blazing, and struck Zeus in the chest. And Olympus shuddered. The blow knocked the god backward, miles and seconds, crashing into the mountains with a sound like the world exhaling. Peaks collapsed, valleys reversed. The sky bled red for a moment too long. But gods don't fall easily. Zeus rose, coughing ash, his face split with rage. He was not alone now. Behind him descended others. Hera, her eyes ancient and unreadable. Not fire, not ice, just power, coiled and waiting. Hermes moving between breaths, daggers in hand, trailing whispers of forgotten oaths. Apollo, radiant and cruel, stringing a bow carved from light itself. And Artemis, silent, watching Aryan not as a hunter sees prey, but as a woman sees a storm approaching her forest. Ares came last, laughing, not because he found joy, but because war had finally begun. They circled Aryan like vultures, unsure if the corpse would bite back. Aryan stood in the center, chest still glowing, breath steady. He knew now, this wasn't a battle. It was a trial. And Olympus was the jury. Back in Myene, the village Callisto once called home, the forge stood cold. Dust gathered where sparks once danced. But beneath it, deep in the old tunnels, something stirred. Callista had known this day would come, and she had prepared. A chamber carved by hand and sealed with her blood cracked open. Inside, not weapons, but witnesses. Records of old, runes that sang, blueprints of flame-bound armor, weapons not of steel but of intention. And at the center, a mask, not meant to hide, meant to become. It pulsed now, sensing its time. Back on the battlefield, Hermes was the first to strike. A flicker, a whisper, a blur. Daggers whistled through the air, curving with impossible precision. Aryan didn't dodge. He caught them. His hands bled, for the first time in years, but the daggers melted in his grip, dripping into flame and then into him. Faster than thought, Aryan murmured, eyes meeting Hermes. Too fast to learn. Hermes vanished before the last word left Aryan's lips. Then came Apollo. The sun god didn't speak. He sang, a melody laced with ruin, notes carved to pierce the mind, every tone a memory stolen. A scream echoed from a time Aryan had never lived. But the flame had, and it remembered. Aryan dropped to one knee, not from pain, but focus. He inhaled the music, turned it inward, and when he rose, his voice answered. Not a song, a note, low, deep, a hum that cracked Apollo's bow mid-draw. The god stumbled. His hand blistered, and in that blink, Aryan was upon him. He didn't strike. He touched, just a finger to the chest, and Apollo saw fire, not around him, But within, the flame showed him his own pride, his own vanity, and the billions of lives his light had scorched without ever seeing them. He fell, not dead, but dimmed, and still Aryan stood. Then Artemis moved. No footsteps, no breath, just the whisper of an arrow. It flew not through air, but through choice. It bent the world around it. A god-killer, laced with night, drawn from the ribs of the last unicorn and the silence of the moon. It struck Aryan in the shoulder, and he screamed. The flame recoiled, not extinguished, but staggered. This was not mortal magic. This was ancient law. Artemis approached, bow lowered. "Stop," she said, not as command, as plea. "You've proven yourself. This isn't your war." Aryan looked at her, and for a heartbeat, he saw a sister he never had, a protector of wild things, a guardian of balance. But balance had failed the world, and Aryan was not here to plead. He pulled the arrow from his flesh. It sizzled. "I am the fire they buried," he whispered, "and fire does not stop." Artemis stepped back, not out of fear, out of respect, and then the sky cracked one last time. Zeus returned, burned, furious, ready. Aryan did not hesitate. He stepped into the storm. No more waiting. The trial was over. The war for Olympus had truly begun. The wind had changed. You could feel it, not across your skin, but somewhere deeper, beneath the ribs, in the bones, like the world had taken a breath it couldn't hold. From the smoking ruins of the mountainside, as gods gathered and time trembled, something ancient stirred beneath the clouds. The fates were watching now. They didn't interfere. They never did. But their hands hovered over the threads, waiting, not to cut, not to knot, but to see whether this strand, this child of fire and mortal blood, would burn through the weave itself. Zeus stood still. No more bolts, no declarations, not even rage, just stillness, as if even he, king of Olympus, had finally grasped the weight of what stood before him. Aryan, eyes aglow, chest scorched, blood mixing with ash, raised his head. He wasn't asking for the flame. He was the flame. And Zeus, he saw it now, was not facing a challenger. He was facing an ending, or a beginning. Ares lunged. There was no signal, no tactic, no ceremony. War never waits for words. Steel met fire and the world split open again. The god of blood and conquest came crashing down with a roar that cracked stone for miles. His axe, carved from the fang of the Leviathan, sang with hunger. Every strike bore the screams of dying empires. It had drunk from oceans of kings. Aryan dodged once, twice. Then he stopped dodging, let it hit. The axe cleaved down into his shoulder, splitting skin, biting into bone. He didn't fall. He reached up, hand burning white hot, and gripped the axe. Held it, pulled Ares closer. "You love war," Aryan whispered through clenched teeth. "Then let me show you mine." The flame ignited, not from his hands, from his wounds. Every drop of blood that spilled turned to fire mid-air. It didn't fall. It rose, and it spoke. Each spark whispered names. Names of the forgotten, the enslaved, the broken, the crushed beneath divine boots. Aryan's fire carried their memory. It burned with it. Ares blinked. Then he screamed. The fire didn't consume his body. It consumed his rage. It turned it inward. Suddenly, Ares saw not his victories, but his aftermaths. Cities left in cinders, children screaming over corpses, triumphs that meant nothing, over and over, millennia of rot. Aryan let go. The axe clattered to the earth. Ares dropped to his knees, clutching his head, sobbing with a voice that had never wept before. "Get up!" Zeus snarled, but the war god didn't rise. He couldn't. Aryan turned toward the king. One by one his children had fallen, not slain but changed. And still Zeus waited. From the shadows beyond Olympus another figure emerged. Not a god, not a warrior, an oracle, blind, floating inches above the ground, her robe stained with salt and time, hair tangled with feathers and bone. They called her Seer of the Storm, and she had seen this long before Aryan was born. She approached the battlefield like a ghost in wind. "Stop," she said. Aryan paused. Zeus did not. He raised his hand, and not for a bolt, but for judgment. Seer's voice shook the mountain. "Touch him, and you'll break the world." Zeus stared at her, disgust curling his mouth. "Enough riddles. Say what you came to say." The oracle tilted her head, as if listening to something the others could not hear. Then her voice dropped, soft, quiet, brutal. There are only two endings, Thunder King. In both, you fall. In one, the world remembers you. In the other, it forgets. The words clung to the wind like frost. Aryan's flame flickered. Zeus stepped forward anyway. I do not fear prophecy, he said, but his voice cracked. Not from age, from something older, a memory. Once, long ago, he had heard a prophecy about his father, Cronus, and laughed the same way. Then Cronus had died. Zeus had taken his place. Now, the cycle whispered again. The sky began to twist. Not from storms, from choice. Two futures strained against one another, struggling to be born. In one, Zeus kills Aryan. The world bends beneath fire and law. Olympus stands, but it casts no shadow, because the sun itself burns out. In the other, Aryan ascends, not to Olympus, but beyond it, and gods become myths. Worship ends. Power returns to the ground, to mortals, to fire, and the hearths burn warm again. Zeus lunged, but this time, not at Aryan, at the oracle. A bolt surged from his palm, white-hot and unmerciful. Sira didn't dodge. She smiled, and vanished into smoke. The bolt passed through, striking the mountain behind. Silence fell. Aryan stepped forward, closer to the king, face to face, the young flame and the old storm. I'm not here to destroy Olympus, Aryan said. I'm here to end the reason it must exist. And with that, he raised both hands. Palms open, no weapon, no shield, just fire. Zeus roared and raised his hand to strike. The world held its breath. The flame waited. The fates hovered, and time itself stopped. Nothing moved. Not the leaves curling on the windless branches. Not the birds overhead, frozen mid-flight like ancient carvings in the sky. Not even the gods. Time had fractured. Not broken, not yet, but hesitated. And in that hesitation, in that sliver of silence thinner than a breath, the truth revealed itself. This was not just the climax of a battle. It was the crossroads of eternity. Two forces faced each other, one cloaked in centuries of worship, thunder-throned and bound by the laws of Olympus, the other, born in flame, not to rule, but to reclaim, not a son of gods, a son of purpose. And every star in the sky leaned closer, waiting to see which legacy would burn brightest. Zeus lowered his arm, not out of mercy, not from doubt, but from something he hadn't felt since the day he overthrew Cronus. Fear, not of Aryan's fire, but of the world that would rise if he didn't strike. Because for the first time in aeons, a god faced the possibility that he was no longer needed. And what's more terrifying than irrelevance? But the moment had not passed. Time, though still trembling, crawled forward again, not in waves but in cracks. Reality groaned. Aryan stood taller, not from pride, from pain. Every step he took forward cost him. You could see it. The blood darkening his side, the flicker of exhaustion behind his coal-lit eyes, the way his hands trembled, not in fear, but in the strain of holding back everything inside him. He was a dam on the edge of collapse, because the eternal flame wasn't just power. It was memory, grief, creation, collapse, all of it. And it burned through him now. Zeus spoke, voice thin with thunder. You think you can unmake us? Aryan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The gods behind Zeus had already begun to drift back, one by one. Hermes was the first, silent, wings folded, no longer smiling. Then Athena, armor dimmed, eyes no longer fixed on strategy but on sorrow. Even Apollo, golden and cold, watched with a haunted stillness. They saw the end now, and it wasn't war, it was choice. Far below the mountain, the world stirred. Mortals paused mid-task. Farmers looked to the sky. Sailors dropped oars into still waters. Children, sensing something without understanding it, grew quiet. A collective shiver ran through the earth. An instinct older than language. Something ancient was about to be rewritten. She stood not at the summit, but at the threshold between the heavens and the earth. Her hammer in one hand. Her face streaked with soot and sweat. And her voice, cracked but unyielding, echoed across Olympus like a war drum. He was not made to destroy you. Her words struck harder than any blade. He was made because you forgot what fire is for. The gods turned. Even Zeus flinched. You built thrones, she continued. We built hearths. You demanded offerings. We lit fires to keep children warm. You made war. We forged hope. And then she looked directly at Zeus. Tell me, god of lightning, When did you last create anything that did not fear you? No answer. Just wind. Just the soft hum of something breaking beneath the surface. Aryan stepped beside her. For a moment, just a moment, he looked like a boy again. The boy who forged blades in silence, who never lied, who watched others play but never joined. The boy called Cursed, the boy she held when no one else would. And now, that boy was a fire strong enough to blind the heavens. Callista placed her hand on his shoulder and said just 3 words. Let it go. Aryan exhaled, and the world ignited, but not in flame, in remembrance. The eternal flame, stolen, hoarded, buried in myth, surged outward in a wave of gold and red and memory. It didn't burn. It illuminated. Mortals who'd long forgotten the warmth of purpose felt it again. The blind saw stars behind their eyes. The broken stood. The tired wept. And in the deepest corner of the underworld, the 3-headed guardian raised its heads and howled, not in rage, but in release. Because even death, it seemed, was tired of being a prison. Olympus shook, but it did not fall. The temples cracked, but they did not crumble. Because Aryan had not come to destroy. He had come to return. Return power to the hands that built, to the hearts that remembered, to the fires that never truly died. And Zeus? He stood alone, surrounded by silence, by memory, by the echo of what he'd once believed he was. Then, slowly, the thunder faded. The storm dispersed, and the lightning, for the first time in forever, dimmed. Not ended, just humbled. Aryan turned. He did not look back. He descended the mountain, not to applause, not to cheers, but to quiet, to flickering hearths, to mortal hands reaching out, uncertain but ready. And behind him the eternal flame followed, not as a weapon, but as a whisper. The gods had been remembered. Now it was time for them to rest, and for the world to begin again. The mountain no longer wept thunder. Its peak, once a throne of storm and skyfire, stood silent beneath a bleeding dusk. Smoke curled gently from its crags like breath exhaled after a long cry. And down its jagged spine walked Aryan, not a warrior now, not a rebel, not even a son of gods. Just a boy forged in fire, stepping into a world that had never quite belonged to him, until now. Below in the valley, the air had changed. People came out of their homes as if pulled by a forgotten instinct, barefoot, breathless, unsure of what called them. Farmers still wearing soil on their hands, mothers holding children to their chests, old men with bent backs, leaning on staffs that suddenly felt too small for the weight of the moment. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just watched. As the boy descended the mountain carrying nothing but the light that no longer burned, it glowed. A quiet, steady warmth. Not a fire to fear, but a fire to gather around. Have you ever seen something so gentle it made your heart ache? That's what they saw. And though many did not understand who he was, or what had happened above the clouds, they knew they were witnessing something sacred. Not divine, not holy, just true. Callista waited by the tree line, her hammer across her back. She did not run to him. She simply stood as he approached, arms folded, her gaze steady. When he finally reached her, she placed her hand against his cheek, smudging ash with a touch that trembled ever so slightly. "You didn't lose yourself," she whispered. And he shook his head. "No," he said, "I found you." Far away, in temples long abandoned, the gods began to fade. Not vanish, gods do not die, but diminish. Their shapes became less human, their voices softer. Some returned to the elements, Poseidon to the sea, Hermes to the wind, Hestia to the glow of candles lit in silence. And Zeus? He remained on Olympus, alone, not punished, not banished, just remembered, as something that once ruled, now a page in the long book of the world. He walked the halls of his palace, each footstep echoing like regret. Statues crumbled, thrones stood empty. The air no longer smelled of ozone and power, only dust. And when he finally looked into the pool that once reflected his glory, he saw not lightning in his eyes, but longing. He whispered Aryan's name, but the mountain gave no reply. Only the stars answered, blinking overhead like distant witnesses to a story that had turned its final page. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Children born during the eclipse bore eyes that shimmered like bronze. Blacksmiths in distant villages woke to find tools they'd never forged hanging on their walls, flawless, warm to the touch. Healers found their hands glowing faintly when they touched wounds. And in every corner of the world, fires lit without flint, without spark, only the will to hope. The eternal flame was not in one place anymore. It was everywhere. It had returned to the people. But Aryan did not stay to bask in reverence. He did not build a temple. He did not demand a crown. He returned to the forge, to Miney, to soot, steel, and silence. He worked again, not to arm kings, but to heal ruins. He reforged plows from broken swords, mended kettles and carved tools, built not altars, but homes. And though no one said it aloud, the world began to shift. Because when fire returns to the hands of the forgotten, it remembers them too. One evening, as the sun died over the Aegean and the sky turned to gold-tinged indigo, Aryan stood at the edge of the sea, Callista beside him. Neither spoke. The wind was gentle, the waves whispering old lullabies. And out across the horizon, a ship drifted toward the unknown, its sail glowing softly, a single ember guiding its course. Callista looked at him, her voice barely a breath. "Will you go?" Aryan nodded. "Yes." "Where?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, eyes on the endless dark, he whispered, "Where the fire is still cold." Because the story was not over. It never is. Myths don't end. They evolve. And heroes, true heroes, they don't stay where they're worshipped. They go where they're needed. So if one night you see a forge glowing in a ruined town, or feel warmth spread through your chest during the coldest winter, if a stranger mends something you thought beyond saving, and his eyes flash like coals, you'll know. Aryan passed this way, and the flame still walks with him. The road beyond Mayini was no longer marked by gods. No omens in the skies, no serpents in the grass, no thunder overhead. Just the long hush of earth breathing as if the world itself had paused, watching him. Aryan's footsteps were not loud, but they lingered. Villages whispered his name days after he had passed. Some left offerings on the road, bread, blades, or broken things, hoping he'd mend them. Others prayed in silence. Not to him, but for him, because there was a sadness in his journey now. Not defeat, not weariness, but something deeper. The ache of someone who had changed the world, yet still felt the world's wounds echo in his bones. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone who carries too much light? They don't shine, they burn quietly. They burn. That's what Aryan had become, a spark wrapped in flesh. And even now, the fire called to him not as a tool, but as a memory. There were still places where the cold ruled, lands forgotten by the sun, where people huddled not for warmth, but for survival. Aryan walked into one such place, a village cradled in snow, its huts buried beneath white silence. No birds, no smoke, just stillness. They had not burned a hearth in weeks, not because they lacked wood, but because they'd forgotten how. The flame had become myth again, until he arrived. He didn't speak when he entered. He simply kneeled beside a frozen hearthstone and placed his hand upon it. The fire did not roar. It sighed, a gentle breath, curling upward, licking softly at the air like a child waking from a long sleep. The villagers gathered, eyes wide, bodies trembling, not from fear, but memory. One of them, an elder half-blind, stepped forward, whispering as though in prayer, "I remember that heat, from when I was a girl." And Aryan nodded. "You never lost it," he said. "You just forgot where to look." He took their hands, taught them again, how to coax the fire, how to listen, not command it, not trap it, not worship it, but know it. They wept, not because they were saved, but because they were reminded they had never truly been forsaken. Elsewhere, storms gathered, not of wind and water, but of men. Word had spread, a figure walking the lands, leaving warmth in his wake. Empires took notice. The high lords of Veleros called him dangerous. The flame-bearer, they named him, a heretic who weakened the gods and stirred the poor. They feared not his fire, but the hope it ignited. Because hope it was harder to kill, so they sent a rider, then a regiment, then an army. But Aryan never fought them. He walked through their lines like wind through tall grass. Swords drawn, arrows loosed, all missed their mark, not by magic, but by mercy. His silence unnerved them more than any roar of battle. "Why won't you fight?" one captain shouted, blade raised. Aryan only looked at him. "Because you are not my enemy." And the captain, a man of 50 who had slain in the name of kings and crowns, lowered his sword for the first time in years and wept, not for Aryan, but for himself. The world began to shift in small ways. Forges reawakened in places where children had never seen metal shaped. Mothers taught their daughters to strike flint. Fathers lit candles not just for light, but for memory. The eternal flame was no longer a secret. It was a language, and Aryan was its last fluent speaker. Yet he grew quieter with each passing season. Not weaker, just emptier, because the fire that once sought to burst from his chest now lived in the hearts of thousands. And though he had given them warmth, it left him with little left to hold. Callista had once warned him, "Flame obeys those who listen, but it consumes those who forget themselves." He remembered that, and so he walked slower now, not from exhaustion, but from reverence, as if each step was part of a prayer. One night, as stars fell like sparks from a broken sky, Aryan stood alone on a hill that overlooked the sea, not the one from his youth. This one was wider, colder. The waves didn't sing, they howled. Behind him a girl approached, barefoot, no older than 10. She had followed him for days, never spoke, just watched. Now she stood beside him and asked a question only a child could ask. "Are you the god of fire?" He didn't answer at first. Then kneeling so his eyes met hers, he whispered, "No, I'm the memory of one." She tilted her head. "That's sad." Aryan smiled. "Not if someone remembers." She nodded, and placed a tiny ember into his hand, a coal she had kept wrapped in cloth, fed with herbs and breath. He stared at it, surprised. She said, "You gave us this. I kept it warm, now I give it back." And for the first time in many years, Aryan let himself feel the heat. Not from gods, not from the forge, but from another human soul. He said nothing, but a tear, silent and glowing, rolled down his cheek and hissed as it kissed the ember. It flared, bright, then steady, then still, and the wind quieted, as if the world itself had taken a breath, waiting, because something was coming. And Aryan knew the journey was not done. The deepest fire had yet to be lit. The wind shifted, not the kind that carries sand or storm, but something older, a ripple through time, a current from a place untouched by man or myth. Aryan felt it first, in his blood, in the bones beneath his scars. It was the same sensation he had known as a child when the gods whispered through the forge flame. Only now it was colder, hungrier, as though the flame itself was being watched. And then came the whisper, not heard, but known. A name, spoken only once, Nyxeros. He had waited long enough. Far beyond the lands touched by Aryan's journey, past mountains too steep for maps and forests that swallowed light, there stood a temple built into the roots of the world. Not stone, not marble. Bone, fossilized and fused over centuries into a cathedral of silence. Here Nyxeros waited. He was no god, and yet the gods did not speak when he walked. He had no worshippers, no temple hymns. He was the silence between prayers, the space after endings. When men first crawled from caves, it was not sunlight they feared. It was him. And now Aryan's fire had reached too far, touched too many hearts, lit too many paths. It had to be extinguished, but not by war, by reminder that all flames die, even eternal ones. Aryan felt the summons days before it came. Birds stopped singing. The sun lingered too long in the sky, then vanished too quickly. His dreams bled into waking. He saw Callista standing at her forge, but her face was turned to ash. He saw Histus, broken and bound beneath chains of molten bronze, eyes pleading but silent. And he saw the girl, the child who had returned the ember, walking alone into a forest, her flame growing dimmer with each step. He awoke with frost on his fingertips. He knew. It was time to walk into the dark. The final journey led him to a chasm older than Olympus, a place where the earth had been torn not by titans, but by sorrow. The air here was thick, still, as though breath itself had been forbidden. Aryan stood at its edge, and below, not in light, but in absence, waited the mouth of the world, the hollow forge. It was said to be where fire first learned to scream. And it was there that Nyxeros waited. No guardian stood at its mouth. No oracle cried warning. Only one sign remained. A circle of stones scorched black, each etched with the same word in 100 dead tongues. Return. But Aryan stepped forward. Not with pride, not with fear, but with the quiet resignation of someone who had given everything and had only one thing left. He descended into the dark. The path was not straight. It twisted, bent reality itself. He saw moments from his life play on the walls in flickers of flame, Callista's fingers guiding his hand on a blade. His first spark. The first time he heard laughter and didn't know what to do with it. And then, her, the girl, not as a child, but grown, alone, holding a dying ember in cupped hands, walking into cities now filled with ash. He reached for her, but the image crumbled. Gone, just memory now. And still he walked. The hollow forge had no fire, just cold, the kind that lives in silence in deep places where warmth is a myth passed down to the stones. And there, seated upon a throne carved from cooled obsidian, with no crown, no face, only a shape wrapped in shivering dark, was Nyxeros. He did not rise. He did not speak. But Aryan felt it, like pressure on the soul. Like every fear you've buried coming to stand behind you, Nyxeros was not death. Death was a mercy. Nyxeros was the absence of fire, of purpose, of warmth, and he had come to take the flame back. Aryan stepped forward, chest bare, arms open. I brought it this far, he whispered. The echo didn't carry, but it doesn't belong to me anymore. A pause. Then for the first time in millennia, Nyxeros moved. One arm, rising, and the darkness bent with it. Aryan felt the pull, not of flesh but of light, being drawn from him. The very thing that made him more than mortal. The gift stolen from Olympus. The spark that had once danced in the forge of gods. It began to leave him, and he let it, because he had already passed it on. To the girl, to the villagers, to the forges rekindled, to every soul who had remembered how to listen. Nyxeros was taking a flame, but not the fire. That had become a tide, and no hand, not even his, could hold back the sea. And then just as the last ember left Aryan's body, a whisper echoed, not from Nyxeros, but from somewhere higher, older, Callista's voice. Flame obeys those who listen, but it chooses where to live. And in that instant, something shifted. Nyxeros stopped, froze, because the flame hesitated. It did not return to the dark. It turned and ignited him. There was no scream, only the sound of glass breaking in eternity. And for the first time since time had a name, Nyxeros burned, not destroyed, transformed, by memory, by sacrifice, by a boy born of fire and steel, who had never sought to be God, only a spark in the dark, and the hollow forge roared with light once more. They found his body at dawn, charred at the edges, and yet untouched. At the mouth of the hollow forge, where no warmth had lingered in 1,000 lifetimes, now stood a flame that would not die. No torch, no wood, just heat, endless, humming, alive, dancing above the stone where Aryan had fallen. No one claimed it. No priest dared bless it. No god came to retrieve what remained, because this fire was not divine. It was human, the kind born of pain, of sacrifice, of memory, a reminder that a single life, if forged in purpose, could outlast even myth. Years passed, then decades. Stories spread across the lands like wind-borne embers. Of a boy with coal-burnt eyes and hands that sang with steel. Of a blacksmith mother who defied Olympus with nothing but her craft. Of a father, broken and divine, who gave no prophecy, only a name whispered in ash. Aryan, the fireborn, the boy who walked into the hollow heart of the world and lit it from within. But stories like flame twist with time. Some claimed he defeated Nyxeros in battle, sword against shadow. Others said he never truly lived, just a symbol conjured by hope in a dying age. But one tale endured, never rewritten. The girl, the one who bore the ember he gave her. A child then, a woman now. She vanished after the night of the flame's rebirth. Some say she walked north into the stone cities. Others say she sailed east, carrying the fire across the salt wind. But one thing was known. Wherever she walked, forges lit themselves. Fires burned brighter. And when kings spoke of empire and priests whispered apocalypse, she would appear, hooded, silent, holding a single glowing ember in cupped hands. Not to offer it, but to remind them. The fire did not belong to gods, not anymore. In a forgotten temple high in the cliffs of Myini, beneath ivy and soot, Callista's forge still stands. Rust claims the walls, Dust blankets the tools. But the anvil, her anvil, bears no age. And beneath it, etched in iron that no god could melt, is a single line. Flame obeys those who listen. Every year, someone places a new blade on the stone beside it. Different hands. Different shapes. Same metal. Each one forged not in ambition, but in remembrance. Not to conquer. To kindle. To carry forward the memory of a boy who never asked to be more than what he was. A spark. One night a traveler stops there, young, wide-eyed, calloused palms. She lights a small fire by the forge, just enough to warm bread and boil water. As she eats, she stares at the anvil, then opens her satchel. She removes a black stone, no larger than a thumb, wrapped in cloth. It pulses faintly. She places it on the cold anvil, and the flame rises. No tinder, no wind, just fire. Pure, silent. Unbreaking. She doesn't bow, doesn't speak. She just watches it. And as dawn climbs over the cliffs, painting the forge in blood-red light, she leaves without taking the ember. Behind her, the fire does not fade. It grows, waiting for the next soul to find it, to remember, to listen, and to carry it forward, into the dark, into the world, into whatever comes next. Because the flame is not a weapon, it's not a throne. It is the question that every god fears. What if man was meant to light the heavens, not climb them? What if fire was never stolen, but born? And what if the most dangerous thing you can give the world is hope that cannot be extinguished? The myth ends here. But the fire does not. It waits, and it listens.